Hey everybody, welcome to The Bottom Line. I'm Michael Noland. Tonight we're going to be talking about a long-lost album, a long-lost Paul McCartney album. No, more than that, a long-lost Paul McCartney and Wings album. And of course I'm talking about the upcoming release on June 14th of this year, One Hand Clapping by Paul McCartney and Wings, because oneth by land or twoeth by sea. If it isn't coming for you, it's definitely coming for me. All right, so just in case you've been living under a rock, yes indeed, we are getting a brand new Paul McCartney and Wings album. It was never released officially the first time around. Bootleg copies of the video of these sessions have been available to us Beatle fans for years, and I have watched them dozens of times. I love these sessions. Now, you've got to understand about when these sessions occurred. Paul McCartney had already lost his first incarnation to Wings, with Denny Sewell and Henry McAuliffe leaving before he could record Band on the Run. This left Paul McCartney, among other things, to do the vast majority of drumming on that record. And at the time of these sessions, Band on the Run had been #1 for 7 weeks in a row in England at that time. Paul thought this would be an excellent time to do a live in-studio special that he had planned to release. Of course, by this time, Paul had already replaced the departing members with Jimmy, and this time with Geoff Britain on drums. Now, Geoff wouldn't last very long with Wings. He's on a couple of cuts on the Venus and Mars album, only to leave the band under, well, stressful conditions at that point. He would be replaced immediately with Joe English, and most people would say that Joe English was in the classic lineup of Wings, and I wouldn't argue with that point. But at the time, Geoff was the third drummer for Wings. You may be thinking second, but if you take their albums in chronological order, it's actually Paul McCartney who served as Wings' second drummer, with Geoff taking his place for the live sessions here that we're talking about in tonight's video. Now, I think the main reason that Paul McCartney never really released this film or any recordings of it at the time was because of the departure of Geoff Britain. You've got to remember that Venus and Mars sold damn near as well as Band on the Run, and in my opinion, every bit as good a record. But by the time that record was complete, Joe English was on the scene, and Paul had plans for not only to tour, but to film that tour. So if he had released this, then the very next film would have been probably Rock Show, Joe English on there. I think that might have confused fans, and Paul was trying to make this band look as solid as he could at the time. Now, as the bootlegs have made clear over the years, there was a lot of infighting and a lot of nitpicking between some of the members. They were all kind of sussing each other out and seeing who was going to wind up being the top dog. I think that Denny Lane was making sure he was still co-captain, and you could clearly see him working to get Jimmy in his corner. Anyway, it wasn't very long before Geoff Britain found himself out of favor. It didn't help that he was a black belt in the martial arts and that he was a very disciplined individual. Many in the band were still heavily partaking in whatever the drugs were of the day. And so with all of that in mind, and the fact that Geoff Britain was found talking about how much money he was going to be making being Paul McCartney's drummer, he was out before you knew it. But let's get back to these sessions, and this was a happy time. Everybody, besides the sniping going on, obviously, was in a pretty solid form for these sessions. Now, we've already received a pre-release, Junior's Farm. It's wonderful. There is air, and the stereo spectrum is wonderful. The sound stage is all there. Everything you could ask for in a live recording. And if this first pre-release is any indication on how this album is going to sound, I am super excited. In fact, I've already pre-ordered the 2-edition plus bonus disc LP for this album, and I am just absolutely salivating until the day it arrives. Now, why am I so excited about this release? I'm more excited about this release than I was for the 2LP 50th anniversary of Band on the Run. And I still say that's an important historical document into itself. I can't even imagine owning just Band on the Run without the unadored mixes that go with it. Well, the reason I'm excited for this is, you know, basically Geoff Britain was pretty much written out of the history of Wings for the average fan. Paul put a kibosh on the release of this film, and up till now has put a kibosh on any of these tracks being shown in an album format, other than a few of them showing up in special editions on his archive releases. And it's also good, and I think essential, that Paul is releasing 2 Wings projects right in a row, all within 1 year. You know, it's been a while since Paul has really openly acknowledged his time with Wings. His concerts these days cover more of his Beatle period, but on top of all of that, with this being released, and I hope it's a permanent release and that it finds a home in his direct canon. And the reason for that is, now with the release of this album, we now have a full canon of Wings material. But it's more than that, folks. These sessions, they were hot. I mean, if you think about all the material that's going to be released, and he accomplished all of this live in the studio in a period of 4 days. The last day was just with him alone, and we're going to get some of that material too. But also, all of this material, as it is included, is also an absolute lesson in how to be a master songwriter. Paul goes over material that he wrote for other people, the other side of him that I often think, especially by Lennon fans, gets a little bit maligned. Of course, it didn't help when Lennon was once quoted as saying that a lot of McCartney's music was granny music. And of course, George Harrison was right there with him, supporting that entire line of thought. Now, I'm also hoping we're going to get the film to go along with this. I'm hoping that this is the first release and that the film will be following, hopefully, by next year. Now, like I've said, I've heard the pre-release of Junior's Farm, all right? And I haven't had the time to go back and find my bootlegs of the original recordings of these, but by memory, there is a lot more air. This is a superior recording, and it's all live. And here's another thing, folks. You might be thinking, well, we've already got Wings Over America, a triple live album with a lot of these songs. Why do we need another live Wings album? Well, that's a great point. And I think personally that Wings Over America is in the top 5 of all live albums. Not quite up there with the Allman Brothers at Fillmore East. That's got to be my favorite. But you know what? Just by thinking about it in the moment, Paul McCartney, Wings Over America may very well be my second favorite live album of all time. But you see, that's him live at a show. He can't stop the band. He can't just go, oh, we really messed up, folks. You know, that messes up the show. And Paul McCartney is a showman. So that album is fantastic to catch Paul in the moment. And clearly, you can see how great this band was. But with these sessions, of course, we get the very best takes, don't we? Like I said, this was over, well, with the band, 3 days. And so they had the luxury to go over these songs till they got it right. So with this album, we get Paul McCartney live in a studio where the sound is more easily captured and tamed. And yet each of these performances is just as live as what you've got on Wings Over America. On top of that, we have Geoff Britain. Geoff Britain was a drummer for Wings. We need an album with him on it, not just Venus and Mars with him on a few cuts. To be honest with you, visually, I loved the look of Geoff Britain. First of all, he's a great drummer. You're going to find that out on this album. Also, look up on YouTube for these sessions. I'm sure there's got to be some copies of all the bootlegs that were available, and you can clearly see the man had a snap that no other Wings drummer had. He really lays into his snare like nobody's business. Now, that might be another reason why Geoff didn't last, because Paul has been known to like drummers who go to their tom-toms. Denny Sewell even said that when he first met Paul and he knew who he was finally. He went and he tried to drum like Ringo drummed, and he went to his toms. Paul would later say that's why he liked Denny, is I really liked the way he would go to his toms. Now, Geoff Britain can handle tom work just fine, but he does tend to lay on the syncopation of the snare, and frankly, I love it, especially on the cuts that Paul chose to go over on these sessions. All right, so here's my question to the tribe for all of you. And I guess this is mainly to Beatle fans, although I want to hear from everybody. Are you planning to get a copy of this? It's available in CD as well. Of course, the LP will have bonus discs, and I want those songs. All right, folks, I'm Michael Noland. This is The Bottom Line. Once again, just as I see it, the real bottom line always exists in the comments. That is the main focus of this channel. My videos are merely the question. You guys in the comments supply the answers. That's where we are the tribe.